Hello and welcome. What's going wrong in Bosnia and Herzegovina and why does it seem to be falling apart? The international community once pointed to the Balkan country as a model of successful post-war reconstruction, but $14 billion later, the impact of this huge global intervention is not clear. Almost 14 years after the Dayton Peace Accord was signed, the mass killings in Bosnia may have stopped, which was the most crucial goal of the treaty, but the stability of the country is extremely shaky. Beyond the success of the accord lies a barely functioning government made up of two separate entities, each with its own administrations, and each divided even further into rival factions. Mostar, the largest city in Bosnia, has had no mayor, budget or working city council for nearly a year. Important national decisions are regularly split down old political, religious and ethnic lines, allowing the office of the High Representative, an international institution, to step in and determine the outcome of many key local issues. The OHR was supposed to close a year ago, but has decided to extend its mandate indefinitely until certain benchmarks within Bosnia are fulfilled. On today's show, we ask, what will it take for Bosnia to become a fully functioning country? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and you can take part, and we'll take your phone calls on the show as well. Well, joining me to discuss Bosnia's current dilemmas and how to overcome them is Mohammed Shakir, Bosnia's former foreign minister and twice the ambassador to the UN. He played a key role in the negotiations that led to the Dayton Peace Accord. Ambassador Shakir is also a former Wall Street investment banker and dual Bosnian US citizen. He joins me in the studio. In Sarajevo, Curt Bocina is a senior associate with the Democratization Policy Council, a global non-profit that works to promote accountability in democracies. He formerly served in the office of the High Representative in Sarajevo as a strategy analyst. Also in Sarajevo is Marko Prelec, Balkans project director for the International Crisis Group. He previously worked for the prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia as its lead researcher. Gentlemen, I welcome you all to the show.
Thank you.
Ambassador Shakir, if I could start with you. The Dayton Accords were supposed to fix everything. What went wrong?
Well, they did stop the war, and that was the overwhelming positive. But nonetheless, I think it was a terrible expense. The expense was really putting Bosnia's future on freeze. In a sense, the Dayton Accords, in fact, have become the problem for what we face today, because they, number one, in many ways rewarded the ethnic cleansing. Number two, preserved what was then the status quo, that is the consequence of ethnic cleansing. And number three, really left the country that was very much divided to continue to be divided. In fact, that division is perpetuated into something what I consider to be a modern feudalism.
Well, there's a lot of people worried that the cycle of violence could restart. How likely is that in your opinion?
I hope not. And I think most of the people there recognize how painful for everyone the conflict was. Particularly the Bosniaks, that is the Bosnian Muslims, have suffered the most. And I think most of us, I'm one of those Bosniaks, would really do whatever we can to stop the violence. On the other hand, of course, the current situation is not tenable in terms of preserving the country and its integration into the Euro-Atlantic family. Something does need to change, and it probably actually is the Dayton Accords. So I think what we need to do is take the benefit of Dayton on the one hand, which is peace, and on the other hand, I think we all need to move forward, maybe with much greater emphasis on the local leadership rather than international leadership, to move the process forward.
That raises an interesting point. I'd like to bring in Curt Bocina here and ask in from Sarajevo and ask, is it time for the international community to Bosnia to let the Bosnians basically get on with it, to pull out and just let them move on?
No, it's not, and I think it's for some of the reasons that Ambassador Shakir mentioned. You have an inherently dysfunctional structure that was bequeathed by Dayton. You don't have one political center. Essentially what you have is three separate stovepipe political universes, all of which are impelled to gravitate to the nationalist side of the spectrum. So you don't have a true democracy. Essentially what you have is an oligarchy that was set forth in Dayton. And politicians don't compete to woo voters by being a better public servant or delivering services, but rather who's going to be the better Serb, Bosniak, Croat. And in so doing, they remain almost completely unaccountable. No, to break that cycle, I think the international community needs to change its approach, and I think the only member of the international community that's going to change the current trajectory is the United States, working with Europe to try to come up with a different approach, because the current one's not working.
Well, Marko Prelec is also with us from Sarajevo, and I want to ask, sir, what you expect to happen if and when the international community does take a step back?
Well, I think there'll be a temporary increase in tension. Everyone is very anxious in the political elite in Bosnia about what that will be like. But I think it will have a very salutary effect because it will remove one of the main obstacles, in fact, to compromise in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The way things work here, Riz, is that Dayton set up a system in which for every important decision, you essentially need all the parties to agree, which means that every important decision is a compromise decision that pleases no one constituency entirely. So the political elite prefers to sit back, refuse to agree among themselves, and let the international community impose a solution instead. So the prospect of the ongoing international intervention, in fact, makes attaining a normally functioning political system here much more difficult, much more remote. So I think once that prospect is removed and people see that there is no alternative to agreeing among themselves on the best deal they can get, you will find those deals beginning to be made.
I wonder, Mr. Prelitz, what happened to basically the international effort? $14 billion odd estimated spent, and over 14 years. What's happened to all the money?
I'd have to say that it's actually money well spent. If you have spent time in Bosnia, especially if you remember what it looked like during the war and shortly after the war, the country is completely unrecognizable. It is true that, as with any large-scale international project, a fair amount of money has gone missing. But the country really is doing surprisingly well. Its GNP today is about 3/4 that of Bulgaria, which is pretty impressive considering that Bulgaria is a member of the European Union and Bosnia was completely destroyed less than 15 years ago.
You know, Ambassador Shakir, the whole issue of what's being done there, it's become a bit of a political game. I know you're caught in the middle of it as well, with people charging you with things as well. Are you able to handle that? Are you able to handle the political machinations that are really, I guess, still creating divisions there?
Absolutely, we're all caught into it. I tend to agree a little bit more with Marco on the issue than on Curt in terms of what the future should look like. Simply put, I think the international community has had now 14 years to help bring about a real, not only peace, but really real reintegration of Bosnia. What we do find, though, is that in fact Bosnia is not reintegrated, either on the ground or in the political context. So the question then is, who do we blame? Do we blame the local political leadership, or do we in fact blame the masters in Brussels and Washington? And ultimately you can throw as many rocks as you want at the local leadership, but in fact they play to the tunes that's been set not only by those capitals, but by Dayton. And Dayton says the tune you have to play to win is a nationalist tune. So in the end it becomes in many ways a self-fulfilling prophecy that nationalism will prevail in the end. Well,
I was going to ask, are the basic ethnic tensions easy to overcome? Irrespective of who's, as you say, playing a tune, there's still that issue.
Actually, most people on the ground, I think, get along very well. I work very well with Bosnian Serbs and Bosnian Croats who are there, who are here, as well as, of course, with Bosniaks. The real tension comes to the ground when we talk about political authority, change, and, of course, those issues that seem to be the hot points. It is not one of personal animosity.
Well, let's get William in from the UK with a question. William, thanks for joining us. What would you like to ask?
Yes, I'm a director of a small pressure group here called CANA UK, which actually stands for Christians Against NATO Aggression. We were set up in 1999, and we've studied very closely the situation in Yugoslavia. I'm not a Yugoslav. Would not the panel agree, or your contributors, that all that has happened in Yugoslavia has been the partition of a functioning state, namely Yugoslavia, by the Western powers in the interests of imperialism? Okay. This has happened before. Poland, for example, was partitioned not once but several times.
Let me get Curt Bocina to answer this and say, and obviously a lot of people say perhaps it wasn't the wisest thing to split the country up. Could it have been any other way?
Well, it certainly wasn't the West that split Yugoslavia up. The West came very late to the game in stopping what I think were preventable wars, starting with Slovenia in the summer of 1991. But I think the conspiracy idea that somehow this was a machination of the international community to break up a country of 23 million people is ludicrous. I think the culpability on the international side was not in deterring that conflict and taking so long to intervene once they failed in that deterrent role.
Okay, well, listen, we're going to take a very short break here. Many more questions to come. As we pause, let me remind you, our viewers, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. There's a debate taking place in there as we broadcast live now. We'll be right back.